When the sun has set on a Friday night, bringing peace into your home, families will gather all around singing Shabbat Shalom. Everybody sing Shalom, Shalom. Shalom, shalom. Is a gift from God, so put a smile upon your face. He's got the whole world in his hands, so obey his commands and you will know peace. Shalom, shalom. Shabbat shalom, shalom.
Shabbat shalom, everyone. I'm Rabbi Karen Bender. I'm so glad to be with you this evening. And I'm here with our wonderful colleague, Rabbi Ron Goldberg. How are you, Rabbi?
I'm well. Shabbat shalom, everybody.
Shabbat shalom. Let's begin with the lighting of the candles as Shabbat begins just that way. Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Shel Shabbat. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lehadlik ner v'tzivanu lehadlik ner v'tzivanu lehadlik ner Shel Shabbat. Rabbi Ron, it's time to count the Omer, right?
It is the days between Passover and the holiday of Shavuot. So we say, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al sefirat ha'omer.
Amen.
Hayom.
Hayom.
Shiva ve'esrim.
Shiva ve'esrim.
Yom shehem.
Yom shehem.
Shlosha shavuot.
Shlosha shavuot.
V'shisha yamim la'omer.
V'shisha yamim la'omer.
Today is the 27th day of the Omer. That makes it 3 weeks and 6 days of the Omer.
Fantastic. It means that Shavuot is just a few weeks away. So exciting. Now it's time to make Kiddush. I've already poured my wonderful Kedem grape juice because I like for my grape juice to air a little bit. It's always helpful with the aroma. Please
that is the voice of experience.
Yes, please join us. Yom HaShishi vaychu hashamayim v'aretz v'chol tzva'am vaychal Elohim b'yom hashvi'i melachto asher asa vayishbot b'yom hashim komoto asher asa v'avarech Elohim et yom hashvi v'kadesh ato ki v'shabbat mikomoto asher bara Elohim lasot Savrin Rabbanan v'Rabbotai Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu v'shabbat kodsho be'avahu v'ratzon yilchilanu zikaron lemahaseh v'reishit ki hu yom techila lemikrei kodesh zecher l'tziat Mitzrayim Kivanu v'achar ve'otanu kidashta mikol ha'amim ve'shabbat kodshecha be'ahava u'ratzon hinchaltanu Baruch atah Adonai mekadesh haShabbat.
Amen. L'chaim.
Amen.
You know, you're right. That extra minute of breathing makes all the difference.
I think it's time for Motzi.
It is. It is. We have our chala here. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem min haaretz.
B'tehavon. Amen.
Amen.
Thankfully, we've come so far that we don't have cases coming in anymore of the COVID virus, of the coronavirus, but there's still people in need of healing, and many of our residents have loved ones that are in need of healing. So let's make a blessing of healing for them. Mishe be'rach avotenu, Avraham, Yitzchak, v'Yaakov, imotenu, Sarah, Karachel, v'Leah. May the one who blessed our ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, Leah, send your blessing of healing to all those in our community that are in need of healing. All of our residents and their loved ones, all of our staff and their loved ones, all of our volunteers and their loved ones, that they should have a refuah shlema, a complete recovery of body and of spirit, along with all those among the people of Israel who are struggling for wholeness. And we say together, Amen.
Amen.
This Torah portion, which is really a double portion known as Achrei Mot-Kedoshim, is so rich with beautiful mitzvot. It's so rich with wisdom in how to create a good and loving society that Rabbi Ron and I really wanted to delve into some of what we consider to be the greatest hits, but nearly every verse for sections of these portions are really just something that you want to learn and study. Leviticus 19 in particular, some call the Holiness Code, because it's almost like an expansion on the 10 Commandments. And so Rabbi Ron and I are going to share some of our favorites. One of mine comes from Leviticus 19, verse 3, and it says, revere your parents, revere them. And it's noteworthy that the Hebrew word is different from the word in the 10 Commandments, because as you know, in the 10 Commandments, it says, honor your father and mother. And here it says, revere, or the same word could mean be in awe of, or even be fearful of. And what I love about this is that one should really do all that they can to honor their parents. Many of the residents of the home here are themselves parents. Many of you are parents, but all of you were somebody's child. And it can take a lifetime to really reconcile and work through our relationship with our parents. And I know for many of you, you're still thinking about your mother and father and what they meant to you and how you related to them. And I think that in our society, it's an interesting concept, because this is one of those laws in Torah that you don't get a ticket for not doing, you don't get fined for not doing it, you don't go to jail for not doing it. And yet if people don't respect and revere and honor their parents, what have we become as a society? As a matter of fact, China tried to legislate this mitzvah in their own terms. They said, hey, why don't we make it the law that people have to take care of their parents? But it ended up not going through in the end. But I think it's an interesting notion that a country tried to make it the law. It ought to be the law in a way, but we want it to come from a spiritual place and a good and loving place, not a place of fear of recrimination.
I think you're so right, that idea that you can't legislate love or affection, but you can, I don't want to say legislate, but you can expect as a society the idea of revering parents and revering the family unit. I think that's just such a building block of society is the basic family unit. That hits me as being really a key concept here.
It's so true. And some people think that all of the other mitzvot in a way are tangentially related to this one, because when we're a good person in the world, we're effectively honoring our parents. And that takes me to the next wonderful mitzvah that we find in this Torah portion, which reads, don't reap to the edges of your field. You shall leave them for the poor and the stranger. Now, I don't really know very many farmers in my world, and I don't think very many even of our residents here spent their adult lives in farming, but the concept is absolutely applicable. And the idea is you're well off enough that you own a chunk of land. It could be an acre, it could be 100 acres, but you own a chunk of land. And on that land, you're growing things, maybe fruit, maybe vegetables, maybe wheat, whatever it is. And the idea behind this is that the corners, the outer edges of your field, picture a kind of rectangular field and picture the outer edges of it, that they're really not yours. And they're not even exactly God's. They actually belong to anyone who needs it more than you. And so the tradition that comes from Torah is you're not allowed to reap it. So imagine if you had an orange grove, the trees on the outer end are left for the poor. And that way, poor people would not have to come and beg you. They would not have to show up at a food pantry. They'd not have to go onto your property to find it somewhere in the middle. They could literally walk by, grab a couple of pieces of fruit, and be on their way. And this would ensure that no person would go hungry. And when you think about how in the United States, they say 1 in 5 children in the United States don't quite have enough food, how brilliant of our ancestors 3,500 years ago to have come up with this concept.
I think what's even more brilliant, and you touched on it there, is this idea of kavod ben adam, that you're respecting your fellow man, not by making them beg, but they get to earn the fruit. They get to pick it themselves. They've done the work to harvest it themselves. Therefore, it's not begging. It's work that they've done. They're now getting the benefits of it. And I think that self-respect element is so hugely important.
Rabbi Ron, I've literally never thought of it from that point of view. Thank you for that teaching. So wonderful. Do you want to share one of your favorites?
So my first, I'll call them greatest hits from verse 19, same chapter, but verse 19. You shall not keep the wages of a hired laborer with you overnight until morning. So one of my favorite residents and I used to have a running debate whether Torah was written by God or by man. And I always said that the God, and this commandment here really hits me as a good validation of that. Back in the day, workers had no rights. If the landowner or employer didn't pay them, what did they go to? There wasn't the labor board. There wasn't the court system. They were, begging for wages they had earned. And here our Torah commands us specifically, don't make them beg. They earned it. They did the labor. You owe them the respect to pay them in a timely fashion. The idea of making them have to go hand in hand asking for the wages or to make them wait for what they've earned is actively, it's forbidden. You have to pay them and pay them on time for work that they've done.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that. And it also speaks to the issue of any relationship where there's a power imbalance. It's incumbent upon the person who has greater power to not abuse that power, but rather to be compassionate and empathetic. And there's no better example than an employer and an employee. It's tough for an employee who's not being treated right to stand up for themselves because they're afraid of losing their job and they need the money. They need the employer to be on their side. So this is a very interesting idea. And of course, at the Jewish home, very foundational to our values is outstanding treatment of our employees. And it's not even just a technical or legal matter. I mean, this really comes from love in the heart, the enthusiasm of managers to employees to motivate people to feel appreciated, to make sure people know that they're cherished, to make sure people know that they're valued, and of course, be paid on time. That's a given. Surely that is really foundational. Thanks for bringing that one up. So the next one I wanted to talk about is the very famous quote from verse 14 of chapter 19 in Leviticus, "You shall not insult the deaf, nor place a stumbling block before the blind." And again, we have this matter of power. If I can see and you can't see, I have an advantage. If I can hear and you can't hear, I have an advantage. And, I think back, I had a very close friend when I was living in Manhattan who was extremely successful. I mentioned that only because she had the means to do anything she wanted, but she was completely visually impaired. She had a seeing eye dog. And I remember that when we wanted to catch a cab, even though it was against the law in New York as a cab driver, to pass up a blind person, they often would because they didn't want to deal with her and the dog. So we would stand next to each other and have the dogs sit behind us And then when the cab pulled up, we quickly get in because that's how disrespectful so many people were towards someone who was visually impaired. I often wanted to say to them, do you know who this person is? She's a very successful Wall Street investor. Not that it mattered, but it was just a remarkable thing how people would literally trip her up. And it's just such a core foundational notion. If somebody has an impairment, a disability, we should do everything we can to make sure their lives are easier, not harder.
I think it speaks to this idea of Torah giving us a command to be our best selves. There are days I think that God recognizes what man is, and that sometimes we don't live up to our best selves. And here it's spelled out for us how to be our best selves, to give us a direction in that. Totally works for me in that regard. My next greatest hit is from verse 16. Again, very famous. You shall not stand idly by the blood of your neighbor. You won't stand by the blood of your neighbor. And you can paint this with a very, very broad brush. But the idea being that we don't stand by and watch our neighbor suffer. If they are in need, we have a positive duty to go and assist them. That if we see an injustice, we have a positive duty to act. If we see bad behavior, if we can't ignore it. We have, I'm going to say this again, a positive duty to act. So I don't think it literally means don't stand idly by a murder. But if I know that my next door neighbor, they're hungry, or there's a power failure in their house, do I go over and assist them? We have a positive duty to act. It doesn't have to be preventing murder, but it can be these smaller acts of kindness. We have that obligation placed upon us to act in that fashion, to act in a positive fashion.
Yeah, I think that we don't talk about this mitzvah enough. And I think a lot of people believe, look, as long as I'm not harming anyone, I can just stay to myself and there's no problem. And I think a lot of us, especially Jewish parents and grandparents, when we talk to our children and grandchildren, we're asking them, where do you want to go to college and what are your plans and your dreams? I wonder if we ask often enough, what have you done recently to help anybody? Who did you help this week? Who did you reach out to? Who did you take care of? What could you do more to be a good neighbor or citizen? Because we're so ambition driven, but when we really think about it, we want our children, our grandchildren, those who come after us, those who we know, friends, kids, we want them to be mensches. And this is kind of a guidebook on how to be a mensch, right?
It is, but you said something I think is very interesting and very cool, and more than that, very important. That idea of like, okay, I'm not harming anybody, I can do what I want. No, Judaism takes a little different view on that we have, I'm going to use this phrase again, a positive duty to be a part of the larger community and to be an active part of it. This idea of don't separate from the community very much plays a part here. I think that what you touched on there, I think is a really, really interlocking mitzvah. These mitzvot don't exist in a vacuum from each other. They interlock.
Yeah, and colloquially put, if I'm not part of the solution, then I'm part of the problem.
Very true.
Yeah.
Very true. Which leads actually very nicely to my last one. Very, very well known. V'ahavta l'recha kamocha. Love your neighbor as yourself. You'll hear this called the golden rule. Treat others as you would want to be treated. And it's a hard one. This is a hard one because I'll put it this way. It's easy to love somebody who is like you. Love your neighbor like yourself. So if my neighbor is like me, same background, same faith, same community, I think that's easy. But I'm going to put, Rabbi Bender, a little different spin on it, and I want to see what your take is. Ahavta arecha keshehu lo kamocha. Love your neighbor when he is not like you. That's the challenge, to see the divine spark in the other person, to see that the same divine spark that exists within you exists within them. And I think that's the big challenge for us in our modern times. Love your neighbor when they are not like you.
Absolutely. I love that. And actually, I printed out those very words in Hebrew for my mom, and she framed them and put them up in their den. Love your neighbor, even if they're not like you. I love that. And, to take it even in another direction, I once heard a rabbi say, it's easy to love humankind. It's hard to love the actual person who is right next door to you. And so for our residents, it'd be like, it's easy to love the Jewish home, but is it easy to get along with your roommate or your table mate? God willing, we start being table mates again. Is it easy to get along even with your own family members sometimes, or the staff necessarily that's helping? And we want to do everything that we can to find it in our hearts to love others. And it's very rare, actually, that Judaism tells you how to feel. Most of the time, Judaism tells you how to behave. But there's this sense of, if we allow ourselves to get filled with annoyance, agitation, hatred, and so forth, only bad can come from that. So if we can cultivate the emotion of love, remember that your neighbor, the other, whoever it is that you're encountering, is a human being made in God's image just like you are. It can lead to empathy and sympathy in all the right ways. I have one last, thanks for that, Rabbi Ron. I have one last one which relates directly to what you were just talking about. It says, the strangers who reside with you shall be to you as your citizens. You shall love each one for yourself. That's a really a strong rebuke to what's been going on in the last few years at our own border with Mexico, where strangers, gerim, meaning non-Americans, people who don't immediately speak our language with our American accent and so forth, that they're coming on our borders and they're not being treated kindly. They're not being treated nicely. They're being rebuffed, and children have been separated from parents. I mean, it's crazy what goes on. And yet our tradition has always said that person with a different accent, that person from a different background, should be equal to you and should be treated as a citizen. And again, that we should even love them. So important.
Absolutely. As I said earlier, I think so many of these commandments interlock with each other and lead into each other. I also have to say, people ask me now and then, what is it rabbis talk about? And for me, one of the favorite things is hearing the thoughts of my fellow rabbis, in this case, Rabbi Binder, because we have different education, different backgrounds, and we have the same commandments. But I love hearing a Kiddush, a new take on it, or a different take on it than I have. I always walk away from the conversation learning something I didn't learn before. So Rabbi, Yasher Kochal, thank you very much. This is wonderful.
Thank you, Rabbi Ron. And I'm so excited. I've same with you, of course. And I'm so excited because now we're starting to learn in person again with our residents, slowly beginning to gather, even though everyone can't be together in large groups. I'm loving, because I learn more from our residents surely than I teach. And I know that you feel that way as well. And so thank you for bringing up that exchange and learning those and all those new thoughts. Well, we're just about out of time, so we want to wish each and every one of you a really sweet Shabbat. And before we sign off, we'd like to bless you. Yevarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha.
May Adonai guard and protect you.
Yaher Adonai panav elecha v'chuneka.
May Adonai turn his face to you.
Yisa Adonai panav elecha ve'yasem lecha shalom.
May Adonai be gracious with you, and most importantly, grant us all the blessings of peace.
Ken Yiratzon, may be God's will. Amen. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. Have a wonderful Shabbat, a Shabbat of peace and wholeness and goodness and happiness and joy and health. Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
When the sun has set on a Friday night, bringing peace into your home, families will gather all around singing Shabbat Shalom. Everybody sing Shalom.